I'm not sure who this question is for, but it's kind of two questions that have popped up. One, and it has to do with data control, protocols for, capturing data in police reports, data collection methods. Well, will this be looked at as part of either the scope, the external assessment, or one of the subgroups?
I can jump in on that first, and then I can let some of the subgroups talk. Yes, it will be looked at, particularly in our areas. I think bucket number 6 was actually looking at data. We specifically talked about traffic, but also other types of stops or interactions with the public. But it will be also looking at the data that's collected, because and this is a general statement and not necessarily specific to Arlington, but it will be something that we'll look at. But a lot of times in some of the departments that we've looked at historically, they may not be capturing certain data in order to assess certain areas of bias or particular trends, or to say that there isn't a bias of a certain particular area because they haven't been collecting certain data. So we will be looking at that and then comparing that to what would be expected. It's my understanding that there is, again, I might pop this one back to my colleague Rodney. I know that there is some legislation that passed in Virginia that talks about data collection. So there may be some standard that's going to be put out there. But as of previous to that, I'm not sure what the standard was for data for this particular police department. So there may be some areas of improvement once we start looking at what types of data they actually collect. And that would be on stops, that would be on tickets, that would be on all types of different types of documents that the department would keep. And we will be looking at that. And we'll also be looking at consistency across those documents, as well as consistency across the department that all the documents are filled out and kept. So yeah, we will be looking at data quality as well, because that's going to impact our Dr. Coleman's ability to actually assess the data, because there may be gaps there, and that will be part of the finding, to say there are certain data points that were not collected pre the new legislation, or prior to that, the time periods that we're looking at, and that data would be helpful in the future. So we would definitely be looking at data methods, data collection, what they're collecting, how they're collecting it, and what they had or had not been collecting prior to the new legislation. So again, I'll let Rodney add into that if anybody else knows about the new legislation that's being passed about data collection in Virginia.
Well, I have to admit, you caught me flat-footed there, but thank you very much, Marcia. And so I looked at that statute, the law recently, as a matter of fact, early today, but I didn't get a chance to look into the details. I know Devanshi and I discussed this a little bit. Devanshi, do you recall any details about this?
Unfortunately, I don't. I know we were looking at it, but I don't think that we came to the conclusion of that.
So we know there's something out there that's being passed to require a certain standard of data collection, particularly in law enforcement. So and I know it's recently passed, but we'll get back to the public, because it is out there, and we'll let them know. But that will be also a benchmark that we can use to compare to what the department may already be collecting or not collecting.
And I just want to remind,
we're talking about, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Devanshi.
No, that's okay. I mean, we're talking about the Community Policing Act, right? And so that information is available if you go online and you just, Google that particular act. The information about what the new reporting requirements are is readily available. I will also say that the county has also put it up on its government website and the requirements there.
Are there some just basic standards for accountability in policing that you've learned over the years?
Well, there's some basic groups that are seen as authorities. I wouldn't say for accountability, but there's, for instance, for civilian oversight, there's NACO, which is a National Association for Civilian Law Enforcement Oversight. I'm going to mess it up. I do it every time. The president's going to be mad at me again. But they are kind of the standard setter for that. And they put most of the models that are across the country on their website, plus their legislation, their accountability measurements, whether or not they have, what they say, teeth to them, whether, Rodney mentioned whether they have subpoena power, whether they can look at data independent of the officers, things like that. So all of that is actually publicly accessible on the NACO site, and anybody could look at that. So that's kind of the standard umbrella for civilian oversight, at least the models. And then, our ADR, obviously, there's lots of models out there for restorative models, as well as the American Bar Association puts out standard guidelines for ADR. I just did a project in another city where we looked at all 50 states that require certification programs and restorative programs for to create a new police community mediation program in another jurisdiction. So we look for those bodies for that type of thing. But then there are also policing accreditation bodies. Like the big one in the United States is CALEA, which is civilian. I can't tell you what CALEA stands for at this moment because we always say CALEA, but it is a accrediting body that most agencies go after. And it's co-branded by most of the larger law enforcement organizations in the country, to include affinity organizations, the National Association of Black Law Enforcement Executives, the Hispanic Association of Law Enforcement, also IACP, which is the International Association of Chiefs of Police, which is the largest law enforcement organization in the world. And I am on their Civil Rights and Human Rights Board, and I chair community engagement and outreach. And so a lot of the policies that come out for the United States come out of a lot of those law enforcement organizations, and those are set as standards. But there's also standards set by, the federal system, and particularly, the Department of Justice puts out through the COPS office, which has been, historically community-oriented police services. They put out a lot of research on best practices for community policing, and practices on how to engage the community, practices on how to interact with diverse communities. So there's a lot of research put out there by the COPS office and the Bureau of Justice Assistance, Office of Justice Programs, and then also the Office of Juvenile Justice Programs, and OVW as well, which is also Victims of Women programs for DOJ. So all of those national bodies have put out standards research, and then also George Mason, my alum school, has a data center on best practices for policing that measures all types of evidence-based practices for community policing. So, those are just a few I'm just rattling off, but there's quite a few that we will be comparing Arlington's practices to. And then again, depending on what the concerns are, then we'll also look specifically towards that. So there's also some great use of force resources out there that have come out in the last 2 years that we'll be comparing their practices to as well. So again, I'd be happy to share as many, but those are just the ones off the top of my head. And I will, as Rodney, I'll get a second bite at what CALEA stands for in a second once I get off the camera.
Yeah, I think Rodney has it for you. You wanna jump in there, Rodney?
First of all, not the CALEA, but the one organization she mentioned, the National Association of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. Their website, if anyone wants to look at it, it's nacole.org, nacole.org. It's been a decent resource for me, getting myself prepared for my responsibilities on the Civilian Oversight Review Board. And so that's helpful. The CALEA thing, I'm going to throw it back to Marcia, see if she's found it.
I've got it. Yep. It's the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies. So that's what CALEA stands for. And again, it is a combination of multiple organizations throughout the United States that came together to come up with that commission. And it's, it's seen as the standard for a baseline of what a police department can do as far as their policies, practices, and procedures. And a lot of departments seek that accreditation. Not every department gets that accreditation. So a lot of times when we're looking at policies, we'll look at CALEA as a starting point. It's not the only resource, but a lot of states also have a similar accreditation body, which I believe Arlington has a Virginia accreditation, and I know Illinois has also a similar accreditation where I'm at. So CALEA is a national accreditation, and they have it for police departments, for university policing, as well as for dispatch as well. And so that's what that stands for. And like I said, it was created in the late 70s by multiple organizations to set a baseline for what policing should be as far as their policies. And they have audits that are conducted by CALEA. If you get a certification, it's not forever. They come in, the departments that I've worked with in the past, I believe it's every couple of years, and they do on-site as well as random collection of data, and they have to show certain proofs to CALEA that their policies are in line with kind of the national best practices. So thank you, Rodney, for giving me that chance to look up what CALEA was as well.
There's a lot of interest in, how do you look at racial disparity within all the areas that everyone's looking at, and what's the range of opportunity here within the PPG?
Well, I can start. I know for our purposes, we're looking at the policies and the data within the police department. We do random sampling and we compare it to just like my colleague just said, we'll look at demographics of the city and then also look at, where certain stops are occurring in comparison to other communities, and all those different variables will be weighted, and that will, be able to show if there is a disproportionate amount of stops on a particular culture, gender, whatever it may be. And that's, again, we do have someone on our team that has done that in many communities, and I've done it in many different cities, particularly cities that have asked to look at their data that they were accused. And again, this particular community said that they were told that they were stopping, for this one's African Americans, at a predominantly higher rate than their population. And it was a public report, and it turned out that community was, based on all of the information we looked at, all of the, as my colleague just mentioned, the times that people were asked to come out of their car versus a consent search versus receiving a ticket versus being let go without any citation, but, held over. So there's lots of different variables that if the data is there to look at, that you can discern whether or not it was disproportionate on a particular race or gender, ethnicity. So we will be able to weigh that based on the data. So we will be putting that in our report if it's shown that way.
Did anyone else want to comment on that overwhelming a question?
So as Marcia suggested, it depends on what information you have that allows you to do the analysis, and that's going to be data. And so to give me a second bite at this apple about what the legislation that just went into effect in July requires, I can run it down briefly. It would require the local police enforcement officers and state police to collect the following data for motor vehicle stops: the race, ethnicity, age, and gender of the person stopped, the reason for the stop, the location for the stop, whether a warning, written citation, or summons was issued, or whether any person were arrested. If a warning, written citation, or summons was issued, or an arrest was made, the warning provided a violation charge or a crime charged, and whether the vehicle or any person was searched. The bill has other requirements as well, but that goes to the data points we're looking at to figure out, we're going to have to use at some point in time to figure out if there are disparities in treatment.